just want to remind everyone, I do come from another planet. We call it Vancouver. It's God's country. I have one friend in the audience, John Husband, those that know him. And I also want to remind people that if you are following the Sochi Olympics, Canada is in front with 7 medals and 3 gold. Just to be clear. I also have been here probably about 25 times to Paris. Lived here a couple times for 3- and 6-month stints, and don't feel bad for me. I lived in Trocadero. It was a wonderful part of town. But of course, I was welcomed back to Paris yet again with a strike yesterday, coming to Charles de Gaulle, and of course a taxi strike. So there I was on the RER trying to get to the Crowne Plaza. And I know there's a couple Americans in the house, but as I was on the train coming in, of course, a kind woman of about 30 years old comes onto the train, and she starts playing the accordion. And I'm sitting beside an American. She turns around and she says, "Oh my God, it's true. They play the accordions on the train here." An American in Paris. Some of you are asking, who is this guy? Fair enough, other than Louis and Celine and a couple others. Well, clearly in this photo, I married up. I married up to a French Canadienne, Denise Lamarche. And as you can tell by the photo with the goats, they got all the good looks, which is good because look at me. Kind of a follically unhip man of 42 years old. But I did want to explain a little bit my background, that Venn diagram. I started out, I went to McGill University in Montreal, and I did a Bachelor's of Arts, Bachelor's of Education degree. So I started out thinking, well, I'm going to teach. Those who don't teach, remember that adage? Which I horribly think is unfortunate. So I taught for 4 years and realized, in fact, yes, there's more to me than teaching high school. In this case, 3 of my first 4 years were at St. Patrick Regional Secondary in Vancouver. So then, of course, the gods of higher education called me and said, "Hey, you 27-year-old punk, why don't you come and run this new thing we have in British Columbia called the British Columbia Institute of Technology and our new downtown campus?" And I thought, well, that's fine. I'm 27. What could go wrong? It was fun, trust me, for 5 years. And then corporate started beckoning in the year 2000, 2001, and by 2002, I finally moved into the corporate ranks and have spent my last 11 years, 6 of which was between Business Objects and SAP, and the last 5 at a telecommunications in Canada called Telus. Otherwise, it's 20 years of organizational zaniness. This is a shot in China. The government said move. The people said no, so they built around them the highway. That's a bit like my life, to be honest. Quick story, in Canada, the second Monday of every October is what we call Thanksgiving. In my first year of teaching, I came back on the Tuesday after a 3-day long weekend, and in the staff room, there were these 8 teachers in the back right. And we walked in the morning, it's about 7:45, and the teachers back there, I kid you not, said, "Well, that weekend's over. There's not much more to do for the rest of the year. Might as well not teach now," which is just another way to say apathy. There's a lot of apathy in our organizations today. Doesn't matter if it's high school. So then I moved on to higher ed, as I mentioned, British Columbia Institute of Technology. My first month in the organization, I walked into what I thought was the bathroom. Kind gentleman of roughly 30 years my superior stopped me as I went through the second door. He said, "Son, this bathroom is for faculty only." And I said, "Hey, mister, I am faculty." And he said, "I'm sorry about that," which is another way to say hierarchy. And then my first week in corporate, 2002, a new vice president was brought in from Washington to help run the services part of the company I started with, which was called Crystal Decisions, for some of you, the makers of Crystal Reports, if you recall. And as I'm walking past his desk, the only way out to the elevator to get down at 4:30 on a Thursday of the first week, what does Eric say to me. Dan, can you come here, please? As I'm walking by. Sure, Eric, no problem. Does this. He looks at his watch, says, you know what time it is? I said, yeah, it's 4:30. He was American, right? He says, what does that mean? 4:30. Yes, I understand what time it is. Thank you, Eric. Your point is what? And he says, don't you think it's a little early to be going home? And I said, don't you think it's a little early in your tenure to be asking me that? Which is another way to say command and control. So yes, I've made some observations over my 20 years of high school, higher ed, and corporate experience. Like this, for example. Plan ahead. Or if you're writing a book, keep clam and proofread. It'll come, right? Or if you're Lewis, in case of fire, exit the building before tweeting. Now, do you notice it says Paris on the top there? That's the first time I noticed that until last night, yeah. But this is my big crux, to be honest, is what's on the left? The left are, paint cans, right? Some of you home improvement, do-it-yourself people. And what's on the right? The right is, at least in my opinion, life. And to me, our problem in the organizations is what's happening on the left. We're put into paint cans. We put our people into paint cans. We have whatever you want to call it, stovepipes, silos, fiefdoms, organizational inanity, which is a fancy word to say bullshit. But on the right is what I think we all aspire to be, the paint splatter. Those goats I talked about earlier, my kids, the 10 now, 8 and 6-year-old, we have in Vancouver these parties called splatter parties for birthdays. They go into this massive room, and it's just draped with white sheets everywhere, and they get in there, and they just like basically have an Uzi of cans of paint, and they're just spreading this paint around and making stuff. Like, how fun is that? Why can't our organizations be that fun? Well, here's an example. So Damien. Now, Denise, beloved, mon chéri, she's away in, of all places, Newfoundland, Canada, which we call the Rock. And I'm in Vancouver. So she's away on a conference, and I've got, single parenting syndrome. The kids at the time are 9, 7, and 5, and they say, Daddy, can we have movie night? Mommy's away. I'm like, of course, why not? Who doesn't want to watch Finding Nemo for the 1,000,000th time? Okay, fine. So, but of course, what happens? There's no popcorn. I'm like, Jesus. Okay, fine, let's go out to get some popcorn. So we go to the grocery store. Now, Claire, who's 9, has not celiac disease, but what's called a gluten sensitivity. So she can't eat gluten for the most part because she puffs out like a puffish, right? It's not healthy. So, no popcorn, go to the grocery store. What happens as soon as kids go to the grocery store, for those of you that are parents? Well, one of two things. They either boot line for the candy aisle and say, can I? Or, I gotta go pee. Now, if you've been to a grocery store, of course, going pee is not the easiest thing because there are all these big bright neon lights that say bathroom over here. So we have to, go through the store, try and find a bathroom for the 7 and 5-year-old behind the deli where all the meat is in this dilapidated, decrepit backroom storage with spiders walking around. I find a bathroom. So Cole goes first, and then I start looking around, and there's this employee notice board over here beside the door, and there's a sign on it, and it says, employees, you will not use your mobile phone on the floor ever or outside on the back outside picnic table. Anyone caught using their mobile phone will be terminated at the end of their shift. The management. Now, I'm a little bit Machiavellian. And so after Kate finishes her business, the 5-year-old, I pick up, go out, get all 3, off to the candy aisle we go with the snacks. My first individual that walks by who works at the store, a clerk, is Damien. Name has been removed, obviously. Damien, I've got this issue. Claire here, she's celiac. I lied. we need popcorn. Mom's away. Can you help me with these popcorn products? I don't know if they're gluten-free and thus will kill her. No problem, sir. So he starts looking on all the popcorn boxes, right? And says, oh, I don't know. I can't figure this out. But they must be all gluten-free. I'm like, Damien, if she has gluten, she dies. So, and then I start doing this, right? I'm like, I left my mobile phone at home. I'm sure you've got yours on you. And the look of panic that drips over his face, right? I'm like, can you just pull it up and we'll go to Newman's Own FAQ site and we'll see if you got gluten on this? And, he's like, he could not speak, right? I'm like, come on, man, look at these kids. They're going ape. It's crazy here. He's like, yeah, I should. So he pulls out his Samsung phablet the size of an iPad, right? And he easily maneuvers over to the Newman's Own FAQ site, and he's like, sir, look, they're gluten-free. It gives me a high five, right? Like, woo! And I pick up 15 boxes, and we go home. We watch Finding Nemo for the 1 millionth and first time. And as we're watching the movie, and I sort of speak to the kids during it and so on, I'm like, I should write a letter. So I did, on my regular-sized iPad. And I said, dear the management, said, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank your employee, Damien, who went above and beyond the call of duty today by bringing out his mobile phone and finding whether or not Newman's Own popcorn was in fact gluten-free. That was an example of customer service and collaborating all in one short stroke. Love, the Dan. And I went back a month later, and I snuck back into that back room pretending I had to pee, and the sign was removed. So overarchingly, I can say to you that there is hope. For this audience in particular, I know you know there's hope. It's the other people we need to concern ourselves about in our organizations. Because this is what they think. They think that, ultimately problem solving is an individual thing, and you're just stuck there in the middle. But yet we all know that this is how problems should be solved. We work together, don't we? The pieces of the puzzle are out there, and together, when we put it together, ultimately we make the puzzle sing. Our people think problem solving is an isolated event because they're so stricken with these hierarchies and this command and control. Yet ultimately, isn't it supposed to feel like this? Isn't it supposed to feel like teamwork when we're doing things in our organization? Well, why is it then that when you're feeling alone and you're working alone, that it's this whole jail-like concept? What has happened? Have we not learned that Taylorism, Fiolism, any other 1900ism is a bad way in which to both lead and to run your organization? What about the Christmas truce story? 100 years ago, this Christmas coming up, 1914, on December the 24th, if you recall, the two sides, the Germans and the Allies, what happened? They started singing Silent Night in their native languages. And then by the morning on Christmas Day, they started playing football with each other outside in no man's land, exchanging rations and cigarettes. I mean, for God's sakes, this guy's German and this guy isn't. So how is it that 48 hours earlier they're shooting at each other, yet then they pick up, dust themselves off from the trenches, wipe off the mustard gas, and say, hey, let's go play football. Hey, can I bum a smoke? Why can't we get out of the trenches in our organizations? Why can't we break down those silos and, stop the warlike attitudes between HR and finance and sales and marketing and whatever other silo of the paint cans that ultimately do manifest inside our organizations? Blessing White, an HR sort of consulting company, says employee engagement is horrible no matter where you look across the planet. Their competitors are Aon Hewitt. Similarly, employee engagement is horrible wherever you look on the planet. And the granddaddy of them all, Gallup, in this chart says, since 2000, employee engagement has been horrible ever since the dawn of time. Our people don't feel engaged. They feel, in fact, disenfranchised. Oh, yes, there's about 30% of the organization that feels pretty good. But what about the other 70? They're saying bad things about your organization at the barbecue or at the football match. They're not really going above and beyond the call of duty to help your customers. So what does that mean? It means that the last 15 years, the Fortune 500 organizations compared to the last 100 years who's in the Fortune 500 is a difference of 75%. Think about it. Gallup says ultimately that we are, because of disengagement, losing in America at least somewhere between 450 to 550 billion. That's about, I would say, equal to what the EU is in terms of, I would say, your lost productivity. And then Aon Hewitt goes and says, for every single one of those disengaged employees, it cost you $10,000 in profit. Now, to me, at the end of the day, this is what it's about. We have a disengagement issue in our organizations. We have Damien at the grocery store who's scared blankless about doing the right thing for the customer because there's fear of reprisal. And that is not a healthy thing. Because without, I think, what I call organizational culture, how do you ever get employee engagement? If you have a rigid organizational culture, if you have a hierarchical organizational culture, who the hell is going to be engaged? If you don't have engagement, this is my Canadian shot, by the way, there is no collaboration. We call that snowman's crack, by the way. If there's no collaboration, how the heck are you going to actually have business results? Well, studies are proving it. Look at the McKinsey report, which this room knows off by heart, that we are losing about 900 billion to 1.3 trillion in lost productivity as a result of no collaboration. Right, Claire? Bingo. If we don't have ultimately business results, then do we have customers? If we have no customers, what's the main thread here? We don't have any company. And if we don't have a company, your question is, are you next? Now, I happened to be in Washington, D.C. in the fall when there was this crazy woman driving around downtown, running into things, going absolutely as a lunatic. And this was a shot that I found right on top of Capitol Hill in Washington. That's a staffer from the House walking by with, I don't know, 3 feet in front of him, someone carrying a gun, oblivious to him. Why are we so oblivious in our organizations to the disengagement that's actually going on? There are cocked guns in our organization, as a metaphor, of course, and we're oblivious to them. Like Greg Smith, fantastic story. Goldman Sachs, a couple years ago now, he decides to write an editorial to the New York Times. And ultimately he says, our organization sucks, and the culture is horrible, and the New York Times editorial board said, this is good. And so they publish it. And when they publish it that day, what happens? Well, 3.4% decrease in their shares that morning, which resulted in, what was it, $2.15 billion in a market share loss, which then ultimately was the 3rd largest decline in the S&P. And now you got to ask yourself, what about all the other costs? You've got one disengaged employee who's speaking up for everyone at Goldman Sachs saying, this is not right. He quits, obviously, writes a book, goes on the tour. But look at all the other things that are going to happen in that organization now. The focus groups, really? I didn't know this was going on. HR having an absolute ballistic cannon shot at them now, right? It's insane. Half the organization was feeling pretty good. The other half are like, meh. Yeah, whatever. But then this happened. And you ask yourself, what in the hell are those crazy Canadians doing? Well, Aon Hewitt says that now we have an engagement score that is #1 globally amongst organizations of our size and composition, i.e. 40,000 people, different countries with a unionized workforce. So it's, pretty good, I would argue. How? Well, remember those other graphics? Well, at the top there is the Telus leadership philosophy, an open, systemic, collaborative framework for all 40,000 team members such that they understand what it is to be open, collaborative, connected, communicative. And it's built into performance management, into hiring, into succession planning, into everything. It is woven into every fabric in the organization. And oh, by the way, on the bottom left, learning shows up not as an event, but as a continuous, connected, and collaborative process through equal parts, formal, informal, and social. Oh yes, and then the E2OS part down the bottom right, the social part, well, we created Habitat Social. And Habitat Social is the, I guess, delivery of wikis and blogs and microblogging and video sharing, and yes, things like virtual worlds and gamification. And all of that wrapped together, as was my introduction, is my Venn diagram. Learning, leadership, and collaborative technologies. So for example, here's our own YouTube, call it Habitat Videos. Now you can just put stuff out there, great, and you can also have these job shadowing experiences that we call Closer to the Customer, where twice a year we send out 600 executives to the field, in field technician trucks, climbing up ladders and poles, and call centers and sales. And they go out for the day, and they come back and they can record their experiences in microblogs or blogs, or video it and put it up to Habitat Videos. Why not? We're doing it today at E2S, aren't we? E2OS. In this case, something called Telus Lead and Grow series, where every quarter, for a 4-week period, we pick a topic, and then we go and have these live webcasts without any meditating going on with what the questions are going to be with executives at the organization. So it's done with, in this case, we're using WebEx on the far left. There's a back channel, no different than Twitter, using our microblogging platform. We record it and then put it up to Habitat Videos for people to engage later on. It's not the tool, it's the behavior. The tool helps. But how do you get people singing on the same choir sheet? You build in the behavioral model first. Where we can put our entire induction program now in what we call Telus Collaboration House, or TCH. Over 3 million minutes spent in there last year, by the way. But look at this. It's a virtual world where everyone was poo-pooing virtual worlds. We have over 8,000 people using this thing. And we put our entire induction program into it over the first 90 days, where they go in there for 1 or 2 hour sessions over the course of those first 3 quarters, in which to understand what Telus is about, the indoctrination of the Telus leadership philosophy, those pervasive learning techniques, and so on. That works. Or I mentioned gamification. Sochi. You can use the Telus leadership philosophy now to build out your coaching, leadership, TLP, Telus leadership philosophy practices, by building out a speed skating team. And over the course of 8 weeks, you'll be in an intra-competition with your fellow Telus team members, to build out those teams. And every other Friday, you have a competition to see who's going to win the races. And there's gold medal, silver, bronze, platform ceremonies, and so forth. And there's a league table to say who did great, who didn't, and so on. But what are you doing? You're instilling the behavior, in our opinion, of being collaborative and open. And the technology aids and abets it. Or for people who can't go to our corporate stores where we sell mobile devices and internet and phones and TV, well, here's a situation where we get an entire organization mimicking the experience through a game, but it's backed by those leadership practices, in fact. So anyone who's now inside of a corporate store are using the TLP behaviors to demonstrate that with customers live, but you can't go to one or you can't, mimic the experience. This particular game allows that to manifest. Here's a good story quickly about an engineer in Toronto. We were running out of internet addresses, which is not a good thing. So IPv4 going IPv6, for this crowd. Well, Matt Wilder says, well, instead of me just sending a bunch of engineers to a course, I'm going to build a wiki. That wiki is going to have social, informal, and formal learning options. So I phone up Matt. I said, Matt, you don't know me, but what happened here? What possessed you to build it on a wiki and to put out these formal and informal social pieces? He gets on the phone. He's like, Dan, it just makes sense. Can I go back and do my job now? Engineers, right? Ones and zeros, binary. It's like, this makes sense. I'm moving on. Or we don't stop at Telus. Last year, we launched success factors, including Jam. So now we have even another social collaborative platform. And we put our entire succession planning, high potential, high performer program, 750 people going into this particular piece here, Jam, using it for ways in which to understand in the stream what's going on. There's wikis, there's videos. In fact, last week, I didn't take a shot. A VP gets on there, unasked, and she, sort of in her late 40s, she decides to record a video of about 6 minutes, puts it onto Jam, and says, my top 10 coaching lessons. And it's got like not only 1,000 hits now, like a week later, but there's comments, and there are, I think, 60, I checked 2 days ago, about 62 comments, and she's answered every single one of them. That's collaborative behavior aided and abetted by a social technology. So what's this all mean? Well, this looks pretty good, right? But it's just an engagement number, right? So I can walk around and say, hey, we went from 53 to 83, woo! But you're like, okay, what, remember the whole ROI chat? Should you prove ROI first and then see if you can put in social tools and so on? Well, how about you prove engagement first and then put in social tools? Well, the CCTS, which is essentially in Canada the group who looks after complaints in the telecom industry, issued a report in November that said this: industry complaints are up, but Telus complaints are down by a fair margin, as you can see. Why is that? Why is it then in the entire telecom space in Canada, of which Telus is a part of the big three who control 90% market share, that they're all up, i.e. we're included in that metric, but Telus is down? Now take us out of the top metric, i.e. take Telus out of the telecom space. What do you think that metric's going to be that went up? Exactly, it's about 40-ish. Or this. You're like, well, that's a lot of resumes to go through now, or CVs. Yeah, but think of the pool we're attracting now. When we do have to replace, it's double. Or this. Our stock in the fall of 2008, even though there's an economic meltdown, didn't actually dip that much, but it sat at 28 bucks. It was down from about 34. April of last year, May it closed, it split at 71. And now it's trading at about 38. And as recently as yesterday, I found this study from Queen's, which is a university in Kingston, Ontario, near Toronto, that says this: an engaged organization, every single one of these 6 metrics, you can see a difference in the bottom line or the business benefits of your organization. You can stop taking photos. I'm happy to share this stuff, guys. Like, I get it, but you want a photo of me. That's what you want, because then your camera breaks. So now, what has Telus done? They've made me this is the first time I get to say this, the chief envisioner, which isn't a word, but I like that, because I have to explain what it means, of something called Telus Transformation Office. So now I get to go out and provide happy consulting to organizations that want to help change the way in which their culture operates. So I get to do that full time at the beginning of April. Because I want this. I want us to be able to think like we were kids back in the day, going out and just happily playing. I think we're born to be part of something. Look at this girl. Think about it. Does it make sense? Isn't that what we should be doing? Or we might be doing this, in fact, disobeying, because we know we want to be part of something. I use the adage of Canada geese. When Canada geese move from point A to point B, they fly like this. They fly in what's called a skein, which is a V formation. In the V formation, when you're moving from point A to point B, what do? They're rotating leadership. I'm not an ornithologist, I don't speak honk, but they're communicating, saying, hey, my wing is hurting, I need a break. Or, hey, can we stop here? I'm hungry. As best I understand what the ornithologists are saying, our organizations need to be like this, the skein, the V formation of the Canada geese. Because flat army to me is not an oxymoron. To be flat is to be together. The army part is the word armada. It's medieval Latin for flotilla, which is a group of vessels sailing together. Flat army, an unobstructed flow of corporate commonality. Like Bloomberg, this is the mayor of New York City. First day he went into office, He said, I'm not going into Rudy Giuliani's office. I want you to find me the largest room you have in City Hall, and I'm going to put all my directs and directs and directs in there until we can't fit any more in there at all. And there's like 40 people in this room until obviously he recently left office. That's collaborative. That's thinking outside the proverbial box and doing something differently. Like Roosevelt said, Eleanor that is, you must do the things you think you cannot do. Or, in Johnson's case, great works are performed not by strength, but by perseverance. This is a crowd who's persevering. I was delighted to be here, to be asked to represent sort of our spirit in the collaborative exchange. Because even these guys, the Beatles, they had to prepare for that walk, didn't they? But if all else fails, put a whiskey vending machine in your cafeteria, folks. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan. Dan, just...
I'll come back after.
No, just for a short Q&A, just on your talk.
Okay, I'll stay.
So, what made your management convinced that, well, we first come in with a leadership model and then somehow provide also the enabling tools? Because often the management is not thinking about changing the behavior and the corporate behavior, and well, allows to install some tools maybe to improve the processes and the performance, but not thinking about the leadership. And in your case, it was the other way around. So what was changing their mind?
Well, I was speaking with CC. Where is he? There you are. Earlier, and I was asking a bit. It's like, what's your learning team like at BASF? Like, what are they up to? And he had very kind things to say, like they were getting it and so on and so forth. I came into the organization as the head of learning and collaboration, the CLO. And so, and I had never been in HR before, but I got brought into HR. So it was a very kind of out-of-body, uncomfortable experience at first. Like, what am I doing in HR? But that said, I was able to utilize that position to drive some of those social collaborative tools in parallel with the organizational leadership behavioral changes. And what I did, which many of this audience already does, is I got a bunch of change agents, ambassadors, people who wanted to play in the cool team to try out some of these tools. And as each of them progressed, i.e. the tools, they're like, oh, guess what? We're no longer doing induction face-to-face. It's now in Telus Collaboration House. And we've had these 150 people using Telus Collaboration House for the past year. We were? Like, sort of people looking around confused, like, oh, good, great. So I think you have to have gumption. If you kind of use the combination of Johnson and Roosevelt there, I think you need perseverance, but you need gumption. And I have no problem with gumption.
Hi, Dan.
Of course.
You and I have talked about this before, and in the context of your presentation, life being a paint splatter that comes out of separate paint cans, and the organization you work in now that you've talked about before, with the engagement scores in the mid-50s, and what you just mentioned about feeling like an alien when you're coming into HR, could you reflect a little bit on what you sensed as the latent potential when you entered, and through the process of going from 50-something to 80-something% engagement, given, and here's the kicker, the 10 or 15 years prior to you, where there was a merger of two crown corporations, BC Tel and AGT, with a particular kind of culture, and they spent a fair bit of money on, engagement, culture, and so on and so forth. So, which I think is the case at many organizations. I'd like your perspective on latent potential in organizations that spend a lot of money through HR and learning and so on, and still stay there, and what's different other than just the technology?
Yeah, I'd answer it this way. First, two parts. First is, I like the word latent. I often use the word, there is as a sort of a chemistry example or a physics example. There's potential energy in everyone. It's how do you turn it into kinetic energy? And the second part to that, moving it to kinetic energy, back to the playground, I think we all want to do good. We all want to do well. You have to go tap into people at the bottom and middle of the organization who will see that, and so you can bring them along and say, just trust me, we're gonna do it. But you also, which I think we did effectively, have to key in on a couple executives, or 5, let's say in my case, and use them as the beacons of hope and the beacons of change. So we've often seen in academic papers, start at the top, start at the bottom, and try and figure it out. Well, it worked in our case. And then, people no longer wear a scarlet letter that they're engaged. You wear a scarlet letter if you're disengaged. And so now the tipping point, if you're a Gladwell fan, is like, ooh, well, what are they doing over there, and why aren't I doing that? I should do that now.
Just to finish off, and as you know, I got to be Dan Pontefract one day in Montreal because I speak French a little bit better. and so I was on the stage with his colleagues, and I've been hanging around organizations for a long, long time now, about 30 years. And I said to Dan after that, and I was really very honestly surprised. His fellow executives at Telus Quebec, which is somewhere between a division and a separate company, were, for the first time in so many years to me, the embodiment of participative, collaborative, open leaders who were obviously very, very sharp business people, but were telling the employees and engaging with the employees, it's okay to make mistakes, it's okay to express different opinions, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, in very, very interesting ways. And I just wanted to mention that to people here because I think that was a key. I suspect that the executives in Vancouver are similar. I know a couple of them from the past, but I just wanted to mention that. I think it's critical. I was really impressed, and it's hard for me to be fairly impressed by executive teams.
No.
Great. Thank you, John,
Thanks.
for the comment, and thank you, Dan, for
Thank you, guys.
this talk. Yes.